Meaningful Movers, welcome back to Moving with Meaning, the podcast, where actions have meaning, words have meaning, and we open up the conversations to discover what's your next move. I'm your host, Krystal. In today's episode, we're going to have small talk, but with high value. You never know what will come from a seemingly mundane conversation in the break room, a quick greeting from a passerby, or just a random conversation on the ride to your destination. And you know how I feel about small talk. I have a feeling our guests may change that today, but you know how we do it here. We need to set that theme. So let's go ahead and do that. The word of the day is intentionality. I feel like we use this word without really understanding the strength within you it takes. This is the attitude and the power within your mental state to go about a goal with purposefulness and deliberate action. Even if the objective isn't good, it doesn't take away from the power that you wield. So be careful with what you set your sights on. Well, that's enough of me talking. How about we introduce our guest? And there's no one better to do that than herself. Shannon, why don't you go ahead and give the people a bit of background about yourself and what you are going to share with us today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Krystal. I'm really excited to be here. I am a clinical psychologist and an academic researcher, professor at the University of Kentucky. So I wear a couple hats, right? I have a private practice and I work with people that are trying to reduce barriers to living the lives that they want. In my research, I develop treatments, usually cognitive behavioral treatments, and test them to make sure that they work. Here recently, we have been testing a treatment for personality change. There's a lot of research that suggests certain personality characteristics put people at risk to develop, anxiety, depression, other common mental health conditions. And so that's kind of how I got into personality change as sort of a research topic, as a clinical psychologist interested in helping people with treatment for mental health difficulties. But as I started to reflect on myself and why this area of personality change was so interesting to me, I realized that my personality has changed a lot over time. And a lot of that was, to use the word of the day, like intentional. What I am hoping to talk about today is when we hear personality, we think that it's static, right? We think that the personality that we're born with is set in stone. But in fact, research tells us that personality can and does change over time, and that we can actually speed up that process by taking intentional action. So instead of having a personality test kind of keep you in your box or your type or your lane, you could imagine the life that you want to live and then intentionally develop the traits that would get you closer.
And that's a really good point, because I took the Myers-Briggs personality test. I'm not gonna lie, it was dead on with what I was doing in work. It was what I like to be doing. But then I realized, okay, that isn't all me. That's me in that particular role or that capacity. But when you move me out of that capacity, I'm different. And then my personality changed to fit that particular medium or what is needed out of me in that particular situation. But I still love the test. So tell me about what makes those tests invalid.
Yeah. When we think about these commercially available personality tests, I think why people really resonate with them, a couple reasons. One, we love to know about ourselves and to get insight. I mean, most people really don't turn down the opportunity to even take a random BuzzFeed quiz and figure out what Hogwarts house they're in, right? People love that stuff. And I think that the personality tests that we often take at work, they're really face valid. And what I mean by that is they kind of give you back what you put into them. So if you say I prefer being in intimate gatherings versus large parties, then at the end, when you get your result, it's oh yeah, you're more introverted. So I think that's why people they resonate with people, because like you said, I'm telling this test about myself and answering the questions in a particular way. And then at the end, the test validates that and is yes, the answers you gave, that's how you are. And so people like that.
I'm laughing. I'm so sorry because now that you're saying this, I'm wow, no wonder I liked it so much, because it
right. We love to be validated and told that what we think about ourselves is true.
Yes.
Another problem with these commercially available tests is that they haven't really been tested very much in research studies. I think that's problematic because these personality test companies are billion-dollar businesses, and they are kind of divorced from the academic research on personality that's going on. And the little research that has been done shows that results from these tests, they don't actually predict career success. I mean, I've taken these tests like through my HR department at my university. So kind of crazy that they don't actually predict career success very well.
You have this term, 5-factor model.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I'd love to. One of the really well-supported or ways of understanding personality is called the 5-factor model of personality, or the Big Five. Basically, the way that we kind of got to these 5 traits was that a bunch of psychology researchers as early as the 1930s literally combed through a dictionary and pulled out every adjective that described how people are. They tried to put like all of these words into similar groups. And they kept reducing and reducing until they couldn't reduce anymore. And it left us with these 5 broad categories. And now the same process has been repeated in different languages, in different cultures, and we still kind of get the 5 same traits. And also, as like data analytic tools have gotten more sophisticated, we've been able to look at this statistically. And again, we collapse all of these traits or all of these characteristics into these 5 broad kind of traits to rule all the other traits. I'll tell you what they are.
Yeah. I was going to ask.
And as I tell you the names of these traits, you will understand why people like the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, right? Because type 1 or the protagonist and like they have good PR versus the 5-factor model traits that are developed by academics for academics. So the first trait is called neuroticism. And basically that refers to our tendency to experience negative emotions. And that's on a continuum. So some people just naturally, biologically, they feel their emotions really strongly, very viscerally. They are more reactive to stuff that goes on in the environment. And then other people are like the type of people where things just kind of like roll off their back and they don't get their feathers ruffled. So that's neuroticism. The next one is extroversion versus introversion or like detachment. A lot of times we think about this trait as having to do with like how social we are. That's a part of it, but really like the bigger thing with extroversion is our energy level, excitement seeking, and being outgoing is sort of part of that picture versus being more quiet, preferring to small groups over bigger groups. Then we have conscientiousness versus disinhibition. Conscientiousness is how reliable, achievement striving, planful you are versus are you spontaneous? Do you take risks? And then you've got agreeableness versus antagonism. And agreeableness is how trusting you are, how empathetic you are, how kind and tenderhearted you are. And people that are really, really agreeable, tend not to be very assertive, right? And you get more assertive as you move towards the antagonism side to like a point where you might be not a nice person.
Yeah.
I don't know, is this podcast?
Oh, you can say whatever you want. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last one is openness. And this one kind of has to do with our orientation towards like aesthetics and ideas. So we know people that like to sit around and talk about like philosophy or big topics, right? And other people that are like, I don't care. That's boring. There's no value in that. And so that's openness versus kind of closeness to new experiences.
Interesting. And I'm going to take a quick sidebar on this one because you mentioned aesthetics. Gen Z has got this all on point. My daughter, I don't know what she was doing, but she was recording something and she was like, oh, Mom, let me show you this video. And on it, it had this word, I'm being aesthetic or something like that. And I go, what does that say? She was like, aesthetic. I'm being aesthetic. And I go, what does that mean to you? Because aesthetics is something else to me. And then she explained it to me the way you just did. And I was like, girl, for real? So it's interesting. I think it's good that you're bringing this up now because it's so applicable to the generation the kids are growing up in now. But it's very important to get to the millennials and the what was the other ones before the Gen Xers, that they understand these kids are shifting. They're changing because as we parent, we have to shift between different children. As we change jobs, we have to shift between different personalities. And then, like you said, if I interact with one particular group, I got to change, and then I go with another group. And I might enjoy both of them. I just have to enjoy them in a particular kind of mental, personal.
Yeah.
I think it also applies to just in general, overall happiness. Where you want to go and what do you want to be? You can't just say, well, my personality is this, so I'm gonna be a bitch. But if you don't want to be that, then this is how we go about it. I just wanted to take a quick sidebar on that, just to throw that in there, because there was a good definition of those 5 personalities. So we didn't talk about personality. There is a definition of personality, right? That you mentioned.
Yeah.
So can you define that? And then we go into how we go about changing that. Like, what makes changing personality so important to you?
Yeah, we think about personality as like, we often are pretty precious about it. It's like who we are. And so the idea of changing your personality almost can sometimes feel like invalidating or weird. But when we actually give like the scientific definition of personality, maybe it feels less so. So personality is your characteristic way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And again, it sounds weird to be like, I'm going to change my personality, but we change our perspective and we change our actions or our habits all the time. And if we maintain the new perspective and the new behaviors, we're going to fill out those questions on the personality questionnaire differently. And then by essence, have changed our personality. What personality isn't is our tastes, the music that you like, the food that you like, your favorite color, other things that we think define us. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these 5 broad characteristics that are really, when you think about the questions that you answer when you take a personality test, they're asking you what you do and what you think, and we can change those.
Very true. So in that case, what are the cases that we should not use our personality in? Careers, relationships? We shouldn't base them on that?
Yeah, I don't think that you should limit yourself based on where you are now if you don't want to. So like when I'm working with a client, I'm always wondering, what are the person's values? What is important to them? Because becoming more extroverted so that you can be promoted to a boss in your company, like if that's not something that you value, in fact, like career is not really that important to you because maybe family is more important to you or your leisure time is more important to you, then you're not really going to have the motivation to make the hard changes. You have to step outside of your comfort zone to make these changes. I don't think there's like a hard and fast rule around when we should think about changing our personality traits. I don't think that there is an optimal level of each personality trait that everyone should have. It really depends on your goals and values. What I do when I work with clients, again, is go through a list of like 11 different values domains, everything from parenting to family to intimate partner to friends to career to leisure time to your orientation towards lifelong learning. And I always tell people, you can't list all of them 10 out of 10 important. We have to make some cuts. We have to prioritize. Once we figure out what really is important to you, and again, when we're talking about values, we're talking about like perfect world. We're talking about ideal, sky's the limit kind of thing. Once we figure out what's important to the person, then we're like, okay, well, if you were living in accordance with that value, maybe your value for your intimate relationship is honesty. If you were living in accordance with your value, well, that would look like telling my partner how I feel about certain things, maybe asking my partner to do things, even though I'm afraid that that might make them angry and maybe they'll leave. Those are things that are hard. They're behaviors that you would have to change, but that's in line with being honest. And so if that's really important to you, then we could work on your agreeableness. We could work on your ability to trust people. If that's not important to you, then don't. Kind of like that's the alternative is just don't. And that's fine based on what's important to you.
Oh my God. That is so like, I just had this like, oh my God moment. I mean, they kind of do this in marriage counseling. And as you were going down this list, I was like, God, this would have been great to have an innocent conversation when I was dating. And I did, but it was like a really short list. It was a shorter version than this. It was like, do you want kids? Do you have to live in this state? Stuff like that. Those were like the cuts. If you answered one of the things wrong, I didn't say anything. I just didn't call back or answer the phone. But yeah, you're right. You do things like that. You mentioned before, though, we could speed up the change in that process.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah, great. research suggests that personality changes across the lifespan on average for everybody, right? So people tend to get more conscientious. We tend to be less neurotic. We tend to be more trusting or friendly towards others, prioritize relationships, tend to become more open. So that just kind of happens at a population level. And that takes years, right? To make those changes intentionally and to speed that process up, pulling techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy is really helpful. Again, personality is your characteristic way of thinking and behaving. And cognitive behavioral therapy is changing perspective, changing the way you think about things, and then behavior change, putting yourself outside of your comfort zone to move towards your goals. And so it's a really nice match for this idea of changing our personality. And it's relatively simple, CBT. If you're struggling with, sort of functioning and you need the help of a therapist, like that's a really appropriate use of a therapist. But if therapy's not your thing, you can still benefit from CBT skills, right? Because that's really what they are, it's life skills. And so usually we will identify a situation that is difficult in someone's life and we will ask them, what did you think in that situation? In the short term, what did you get out of it? Because I'm very much like people don't do things for no reason. Going back to that idea of like trust with a partner. If I am nervous to like bring up something that's been bothering me in my relationship and I don't do it, in the short term, gives me relief. It like protects me from that angst or scariness of having the conversation. But in the long term, it is not consistent with my value of honesty and having an open relationship where I feel like I can talk about those things with people. And so the first piece is kind of changing the way you think about things, because your fear is, well, if I talk about this with my partner, they will get mad and it will hurt our relationship. And so how could you reframe that? How can you use evidence from your relationship? Well, whenever I have brought stuff up in the past, like it eventually comes out and typically they were like, I wish you had told me sooner. Those are things like are actively calling to mind the evidence that goes against that. People can't be trusted, right? And that's the cognitive piece, right? And then the behavioral piece is trying something new, testing your hypothesis that your partner is going to get mad at you if you share something that you want to be different in the relationship. The only way to kind of know is try it, right? To take a baby step. Maybe you don't start with the scariest thing. Maybe you start with, hey, like, I wonder if we could like take turns emptying the dishwasher or something. And you see how your partner handles that. And they handle it in the way that feels comfortable to you. Then maybe you try something that's a little bit harder, like sharing something about your past that maybe you're kind of nervous to share. Right? And you sort of just go up this ladder. And as you do that, you collect evidence like from the environment that it's okay to do that, right? You're changing your behavior. Your beliefs are going to change, right? Because you're going to learn from your experience. Oh, yeah, like I guess you can trust some people. And that's like a personality questionnaire question. People can't be trusted. Strongly disagree, agree,
Yeah.
And so as you make those small tweaks in your life and you maintain them and you start that upward trajectory, then you're going to fill out those personality questionnaires differently, right? You have essentially shifted your agreeableness.
That's interesting, because I would have never thought to start with something so, I don't even know what to call it, but something so unrelated. Let's say that.
Yeah.
Let's just focus on you being able to empty out this dishwasher. And then after we do that, then I'm now feeling more like I can talk to you about something else.
Yes.
Because now that you've shown me that you care about meeting my needs in this way, let's talk about this other piece.
Yeah. And so it's not really about getting help with chores, although that's a great bonus. It's really about paying attention to how the environment responds, the environment being your partner in the situation, right? Like how your environment responds when you try a different behavior. And if it goes well, that's reinforcing. Anyone that's ever taken intro to psychology knows that if something good happens after you engage in a behavior, then it's reinforced. You're going to do it again. Yeah. And so it's that pattern of reinforcement that then solidifies the behavior so that you continue to do it again, like essentially. And if you maintain it over time, changing your personality.
Funny story. This is like 2 funny stories before we close. So one is about the communication. I had a really bad migraine. I was sick and my husband works away from home, like out of the state. I was going to the hospital and I was just dealing with this, and I'm also taking care of the kids. So there's a lot going on here. he's calling me and he's checking on me. I'm trying to answer his questions about what was going on or what the doctor was saying. He was kind of interrupting me, but I can tell he's really angst. There was a real angst feeling about these questions, and I felt like I was really calm. I was explaining something, and he stopped me and he said, "You know what? I just think you're mad at me. Are you mad at me?" And I go, "Oh, no, I'm just trying to answer your question." So he goes, "Well, that's why I'm asking these questions, because I don't want you mad at me because I'm not there." And so he was trying to get to me indirectly without just saying, "Are you upset that I'm not there to help you with this?"
Yeah.
And in the moment where he was like, "Okay, I'm not getting the reaction that I think I'm getting, I'm just going to go ahead and ask her." That was a huge growth for him because he doesn't do that.
Yeah.
I wanted to share that because, like you said, we change over time. This was a big change, and I appreciated it. Yeah, kudos to you, babe. Here's a Q&A. All right. My husband and I and my oldest two were introverts. Well, me, my husband, and my oldest are extreme introverts, okay? And I guess just as they kept coming, they got more extroverted and more extroverted. So my daughter, she's like, "Well, I'm an extroverted introvert." And I'm like, "Really? Because you're on the cheer team, you're real popular." I kind of feel like when you have these birthday parties, these are a lot of people that are coming. And she's like, "Yeah." Okay. I'm like, "Well, you're just downplaying your value, baby, to these kids. Like, you really mean something to them. So just think about that." But my youngest, he's an extrovert. There's no introvertedness in there. So I had read this article and I don't even remember it, but because I was offended by it, but it said to be an introvert wasn't a good thing. It's done out of trauma because you're not dealing with it. You're dealing with it inappropriately by closing yourself off. So I'm going to ask you, because I don't know what it was. I didn't even want to finish reading it. And I feel like you are someone that I trust more so than that damn article. So tell me what you think about it.
Yeah, so this comes up a lot, I feel like, whenever I am working with a patient that has social anxiety disorder. So social anxiety disorder, you can be introverted and you can be extroverted and still be really anxious around what other people think about you. Are people evaluating me negatively, and kind of avoid social situations. So having social anxiety doesn't necessarily translate perfectly to like, oh, only introverts have that. And so one of the things that I often would explore with people is, are you not going out to this party or, doing this social situation or not moving up through leadership in your company because you're anxious, because you're afraid something bad is going to happen, that people will judge you? Or is that not a value for you? Is that not a priority for you? And I think that depending on the answer to those questions, the treatment is different, right?
Yeah.
We're not necessarily going to change something that somebody doesn't think is a problem. Maybe it's not a problem. It's a perfect match with like the work that they're doing, with how they enjoy spending their time. However, if it's like, I would actually really like to do those things, I just get too anxious, that's a different story.
Okay. Good answer. I really do like that. I think you asking people makes it more intentional. Because they have to own that. They have to be accountable for that. And they have to be truthful about it. So even if you ask the question and they kind of tell a little white lie about it, well, I guess you're good. And then they come back to you and it's still the same issue. It's like, okay, let's revisit the question. That's really cool. And I don't know, do you take it at face value? Do you do like some little follow-ups just to make sure?
Yes, definitely follow-ups.
Okay.
So often when we're talking about anxiety disorders, we're talking about avoidance. Something makes you anxious, you avoid it. So maybe it's heights, maybe it's snakes, maybe it's elevators, maybe it's other people. And so we're talking about avoidance, and we've been talking about avoidance. So I'll often ask, is this like you're saying like, I don't care about other people because you're anxious about it? And so you want to just like, yeah, I don't care about that anyway, but it's not really genuine? Or are you sort of like, yeah, I'm kind of indifferent to, having a ton of friends or whatever. That doesn't really bother me. Now's the time to be honest with yourself, because I'm going to take what you're saying at face value, but the only person that gets screwed by not really examining that is you.
Yeah, I get that. And I like that. I like personal investment. I like personal accountability. I just think that every time I have these conversations, it just double downs on that. It really does. And the last question I wanted to ask you is empathy. Like, how does empathy play into this?
Yeah. So empathy empathy is like sort of housed within that trait of agreeableness. People that are more agreeable tend to be more empathetic. Yeah. And I mean, empathy is something that we can develop over time. So like anyone that has kids, has a toddler, has a 4-year-old, has a 5-year-old, honestly, like with my kids, both of them, I was sort of like, gosh, you're very self-centered. You are just like, oh my God. And then as they aged, you saw that empathy come online, right? Like, oh, mommy, are you okay? Like, you see it come online, right? And so it's something that we really can develop by changing the way we think about other people. So like, if you notice that you have kind of the belief that's like, well, I worked hard, so you should have to too, even if the situation, maybe you shouldn't have had to work hard through that. Or, I don't feel like other people deserve my help. You can notice those thoughts. And again, like, what's the function of that? What does that do for you in the short term? Does it protect you from putting yourself out there, from being disappointed by other people? But what's your value? Like, how do you want to be? What does that look like behaviorally?
Okay. Well, you gave me a lot to think about and a lot to be thankful for just on my own progression. I hope the listeners do as well. So, Shannon, are you ready to give us your gold nuggets and add that ketchup just to recap?
Yes. The recap is personality is not set in stone. If you want to develop traits, the first step is to identify what your goals are, what is important to you. And then think about people who have had success towards those goals. What kind of traits do they have? How do they act? What do they do? What do they say? What are they thinking? And then examine your own thinking. Figure out if you have some self-limiting beliefs like, I need the adrenaline of the last minute to start this project. That's a thought about your conscientiousness that is probably going to shape your behavior. I'm going to wait till the last minute because I'm telling myself I'm the type of person that needs the last minute. So notice if you have any self-limiting beliefs and see if there's any wiggle room there. Could you think about that a little bit differently? And that sometimes is the push that we need to get to just dipping a toe in a different behavior. And then finally, pay really strong attention to what happens next after you engage in a new behavior. What's the outcome? What happened? How did the environment respond? Really soak up any wins because that's going to reinforce those changes and keep you at it. And so I guess the golden nugget to kind of cherry on the top of the ice cream is don't get boxed in by a personality type or by a personality score or whether you're introverted or extroverted. You have the power to develop the characteristics that you need to live the life that you want.
I like that. Celebrating wins is so important. I really like that part. That was just awesome. Well, there you have it, folks. The intentional clinical psychologist. You heard it here. That's the episode today. This was an insightful conversation, mainly because I came in eyes wide shut, so to speak. I am comfortable being an introvert because that is how I produce my greatest work. But I also noticed that in other settings that require the characteristics of an extrovert, such as public speaking, coaching, and, podcast hosting, I do very well. I suppose I was intentional on changing my personality so that I can be the best at what I want to do. Imagine that. Do you feel that you are constrained by your personality? That based on your traits, you are destined or doomed to fit in a role at a company or in the community? Sounds a lot like Brown Girl in the Rain by Nalo Hawkinson, if you ask me. Yeah, that's authors supporting authors. That's why I appreciate Shannon for sharing her expertise and research on personality because it has no construct, no definition. It is what we say and what we want. Have you noticed a shift in your personality, or perhaps you have taken steps to intentionally mold yourself into the person that you want to be? I want to hear all about it. I love it all, and so will someone else. Before I let you go, Shannon, why don't you go ahead and remind the people who you are, where they can find your resources, or reach out to you?
Sure. I am Shannon Sauer-Zavala. I am a clinical psychologist and personality scientist. Probably the most direct place to find me is at my website, www.personality-compass.com.
I'll make sure to include all of Shannon's resources and connections in the episode description, as well as on my website's resources page, movingwithmeaning.com. Make sure you guys subscribe to the show, Moving With Meaning the podcast, and tap that alert bell so you know when these episodes drop. I'm on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube Music. Please share, like, repost, and follow. Tag someone. We are creating a community. Quick housekeeping before you go. Follow me on Instagram at movingwithmeaning82. Also, connect with me on LinkedIn. I do dabble in TikTok at Krystal B. Clark. My YouTube channel is up. Kindly run over there and have a look or two. Links are in the episode. Alrighty, I'm Krystal on Moving with Meaning with Podcast, reminding you to take it one step at a time. All moves have meaning. Check y'all later.